Welcome into Sports by Brooks on a Tuesday. Monday Night Football last night. And the Eagles, we get right back to where ESPN is used to with a stinker of a matchup. Even though it was a competitive game, Eagles-Giants. We'll talk about the Eagles and the Giants here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, which we do every weekday, I might add, at this time, with Matt Lombardo of NJ.com. Newark Star Ledger. That's coming up here in a few minutes. And I want to hear what he has to say about what the Giants are going to do in the draft, what's going to happen to Shermer, situation with Eli, some interesting questions when it comes to the Giants. They're not going to be 2-50 forever. Plus the Eagles, we'll talk to them about the game. So we're going to get to that coming up. We have everything covered today, by the way. Our producer today, I might add, is Cam Smith in Boston, doing a great job. We'll be in and out with the guests. We'll be playing some video for you, doing some analysis you're not going to get anywhere else, including on the Patriots' latest intrigue. It never ends. Boy, this is an amazing season for the Patriots, isn't it? Nonstop. It has been in the past, but it's a little different this year. It feels like it could be, for me personally, the end of an era with Brady departing, which adds another level onto it. But of course, in the last few hours, the last, 18 hours, we've had this story pop up about the Patriots, a videographer, and filming the Bengals on the sidelines. Of course, the Patriots are playing the Bengals this week. And so we're going to get into that. We've got Bill Belichick responding to the story and what's come out about that. Here in a moment, we're going to analyze that and give you pretty much the cutting edge information on it, what really matters to me, because you have the media saying the same thing over and over and over again about the situation. And we're going to hear from Bill Belichick, and we're going to look at the one reporter who has different information from everyone else and give you the bottom line on the story. We've got it coming up. Additionally, we're going to talk about the Ruiz-Joshua heavyweight fight. We have somebody who was at the fight, friend of the show, Mike Coppinger. He previewed the fight for us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred from The Athletic. Mike will join us in a little while to talk about what happened in that fight and the bizarre response from Ruiz after the fight. Are we going to have a third fight? I would imagine we will, but who knows? We'll find out the scoop, because if something's going to happen in boxing, Mike knows about it before everybody else. So again, cutting edge information. Speaking of that, we'll talk to Neil McCready, who is the guy who broke the story about Lane Kiffin going to Ole Miss. He covers Ole Miss for rebelgrove.com, the rival site. Nobody knows more about the SEC West, Ole Miss, that whole SEC situation than Neil McCready. He'll be with us coming up later. And also, of course, we've got somebody who we actually featured on the show yesterday doing a report from Gillette after the Chiefs game. Ian Steele will join us from ABC6 in Providence to help us, take us by the hand, I guess you could say, when it comes to the Patriot situation. But first thing I want to do is briefly, before we get to Matt Lombardo, who's the expert on the situation, and that's what we like to do. Rather than me come in here and say, this is why I thought at the game last night. Yeah, great. This is how my fantasy league team is doing. I don't want to do that stuff. We don't really do that. We don't just backwash what everybody else is doing and throw that in your face. We bring the experts in. That's why we get people. Or we have some sort of documented stuff that we're going to bring you about a story that keeps you ahead of the story. And so we're going to do that in a minute with Matt in New York. But first, I want to just play one clip. And when it comes to the Eagles, of course, the Eagles are still in a position to go to the playoffs in the god-awful NFC East after the unbelievable comeback against the Giants last night. And I want to play, this is a clip after the game of Doug Peterson. Cam, you can go ahead and roll that clip, the coach of the Eagles after the game last night.
How hard they worked, how hard they've battled, how hard they practiced this week, and to really, trust the process, stay the course. It didn't look pretty, obviously, early in this game, and to hang together. Something we talked about this week is hanging together, and they did that, and so the guys are very, very excited.
Play that clip one more time. That's Doug Peterson.
It's just a great feeling. The guys are so excited. The guys are thrilled. They know how hard they worked, how hard they've battled, how hard they practiced this week. And to really,
it's the Giants.
Trust the process. Stay the
this
course.
Isn't after the Patriots game or
early in this game, and
no.
to hang together
or whatever.
We talked about this week is
I know they lost the Patriots, but so, this isn't after like the Super Bowl. It sounds like they just won the Super Bowl, doesn't it? That was after last night's game, just to be clear. But you'd have to kind of check the date of the video. Wait a minute. Check the metadata on this video. Was this really last night? After this game? Really? Okay. I guess. I mean, I know Peterson's fighting for his life, just like the Eagles are to his professional life to make the playoffs. Okay. So there's that. And, I just wanted to get one thing. We've got some other stuff I want to get into. Let me take a look at what we have here, because we have a guest coming up. And before we go any further, because we have, let's see what we have here. Oh, why don't we do this? We had a clip of him last night on SportsbyBrooks on Fancred, the new coach at Arkansas. And I have a feeling we're going to be playing a lot of these clips in the future. So, Cam, if you would, can you pull up the new coach of Arkansas, Sam Pittman? This is a little snippet from his press conference last night.
As you can tell, this means a lot,
It's yesterday. Okay. Can you play that again? Can you play that one more time? I'm sorry. You probably took it out.
Means a lot.
Just play it one more time.
As you can tell,
I want to enjoy this.
This means a lot.
Listen to the crowd. The crowd is just as interesting as his reaction. This is the new football coach at Arkansas. Do we have the clips? I don't know if you, I should have asked you this before the show. Do you have yesterday? Do you have yesterday's clips of Sam Pittman? Now, this is the offensive line coach at Georgia, who Arkansas just hired to be their new head football coach. And when you hear the response of the fans, okay, here's what we ran yesterday.
Go Hogs!
That's the AD, athletic director of Arkansas, with Pittman.
You got something to say?
Now, Pittman actually, when he was at Georgia as an assistant coach, blocked Arkansas on Twitter. But now he's with Arkansas.
Yes, sir.
This is Pittman at Georgia.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This is public, folks. This is from his Twitter account.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Holy cow.
Yes, sir.
There he is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This is my school, by the way. That's where I went to school.
Yes,
Look at the dog. It's like a Jim Ross hat right there. It just keeps going. It just keeps going. All right, enough. Wow. That's Sam Pittman, new coach at Arkansas. We got some winners, don't we? We've got some big winners. Actually, the fans, we're the winners right now when it comes to college football with Sam Pittman now at Arkansas. and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. And I'm with you, Cam Smith, our producer. Arkansas is going to be running the flex bone offense next year at some point. At some point, after they get shut out, non-con by some. I haven't looked at their schedule. I can't bring myself to look at their schedule. But having been a college football player as I have been, if you don't know, I was actually a walk-on football player at University of Georgia. I was for 5 years, 5 long years, back in the 1850s, actually back in the late 80s. I can tell you from watching that video, I don't know Sam Pittman. I haven't been at practice. Seems like a really nice man, right? Emotional guy, crying and all that. He's really invested. He's probably the meanest SOB on the field that you can imagine. That's usually how it works when it comes to coaching and coaches. Very emotional. Oh, yeah, he's got a lot of sympathy for you out there on the football field during practice. Something tells me he doesn't. But so we told you the whole situation yesterday. We'll get into this with Neil McCready, and I'm going to ask him about that coming up. Their non-conference, by the way, next year, Notre Dame and Nevada, there's 2 L's. And Arkansas actually, I mean, it's hard to say how good Arkansas is going to be. I would say, obviously, this is usually how it works. Ask Jim Harbaugh, because I think this is really what sunk Michigan this year. He made a very bad hire at offensive coordinator, bringing in Josh Gaddis, taking Nick Saban's word for him in about a 5-minute phone conversation. That's the story. When Michigan hired their offensive coordinator for this year, now the offense improved markedly as the season went along, but we saw Michigan against Army. We saw them early in the season. And remember, they moved Gaddis from the press box down to the field. This is the offensive coordinator at Michigan. My point is, whoever Sam Pittman hires as coordinators, that's really what's going to determine what happens. What was going on at Arkansas wasn't so much that they had absolutely no talent. They have talent. I watched Arkansas play this year. Somehow. I got through it, especially the LSU game. Played pretty well in the first half against LSU this year at Baton Rouge. They clearly have talent. It's just going to be a matter of coaching. By the way, there are other 2 teams on their schedule, the non-con, non-SEC games for Arkansas, Louisiana Monroe and Charleston Southern. I think we're going to get somebody on tomorrow from Fayetteville or Little Rock just to talk about Arkansas program, because that's what we like to do. We like to deep dive these programs, so you're kind of ahead of the game on what's going on rather than just guesswork. But I do know that the assistant coaches are going to be critical when it comes to Arkansas, as it is with every team. Those videos from Pittman, you were like, what the hell? Those are actually recruiting videos that he would send out on his Twitter feed, but they'd be directed to recruits. That is how he recruits. This is a guy who's never been a head coach, never been a coordinator, and that's who Arkansas just hired as head coach. Now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to go to the NFL. We're going to talk about what happened last night. The Giants and the Eagles with Matt Lombardo. NJ.com joins us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Matt's been with us before. Does a great job at the Newark Star Ledger. NJ.com. And how you doing, Matt? Good to see you.
I'm great, Brooks. How are you? Thanks for having me back on.
You must be reeling at the Greg Schiano news, by the way.
I'm actually more relieved by the James Franklin re-signing at Penn State news, being a Penn
Right.
State guy. But certainly at Rutgers, you look at that hire. Obviously, it makes sense for them, makes sense for Greg. And I got to give a hat tip to Steve Politi, our columnist, who was beating
Great
the drum
job
for weeks to bring Schiano back, and a hat tip to the Rutgers fans and the boosters who spoke with their wallets, and there were petitions and GoFundMes, everything to get Schiano back. And it just got a little bit tougher for Franklin and Penn State and all of those other Big Ten schools to recruit New Jersey. We'll see how quick the turnaround is there for the Scarlet Knights, but certainly an interesting week for the Big Ten.
I want to ask you, do you think the media and you guys, particularly NJ.com, do you think that Greg Schiano would be coach of Rutgers today if it wasn't for what you guys did? And not that you're advocates and have pom-poms, but you're just covering the story the way you covered it. Do you think you guys had a role in Schiano becoming coach there?
Yeah, I think
and that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing.
Of course. I think that Steve Politi constantly beating the drum and browbeating Pat Hobbs, the athletic director, about what a mistake it would be to
he
let
got me
Schiano
to
get away.
Matt, he got me to, right.
No, of course. But I think the bigger news here is that a fan base who has seen declining season ticket sales, they got their guy. Because when people are writing in to Steve Politi and Keith Sargent, our beat writer, and the newspaper itself, that they're taking Rutgers out of their will, that they're going to stop their donations. We're talking big money donors here. When money says, I'm cutting you off unless you hire Greg Schiano, and you have a potentially lame duck athletic director, obviously that's going to be a game changer. So I think the outpouring from the fan base combined with Politi and Sargent and James Cratch beating that drum, I think that really played a factor here. I really do.
I think the better way for me to put it was that you guys gave voice to the fans. And that's really what took place. Yeah, that's what took place. We're visiting with Matt Lombardo of NJ.com and going to get to the New York Giants and the Eagles last night. What were your impressions of the game? What's an overview of the game? What were your thoughts on that, Matt?
Typical NFC East game in 2019. And I think I tweeted this during the game that at this point, I know the Giants and Washington are eliminated. Put all four logos on a roulette wheel and just spin it and decide who gets in the playoffs that way. Because whether it's the lack of talent, poorly coached Giants, or an Eagles team that only started three wide receivers or had three wide receivers active for whatever reason last night and did everything they could to give that game away, including taking it to overtime and, being spotted 17 points early on. It doesn't seem like anybody wants to win that division. And I think that there are a lot of tough conversations that have to be had in the Giants building beginning today regarding Pat Shurmur's future and GM Dave Gettleman's future. But down the turnpike in Philadelphia, I think that there are a lot of tough conversations about Doug Peterson's coaching staff and Howie Roseman's inability to replenish the talent on that roster the last couple of years that are going to come this offseason, whether they make the playoffs or not.
Where are we on Pat Shurmur? Is he going to be back next year?
Yeah, I wrote about this morning, Brooks. I don't know, short of ownership telling Pat Shurmur months ago when he went to Daniel Jones that wins and losses no longer matter and it's all about developing the quarterback. Short of that, I don't know how he's back. And I don't know how you bring him back. You've now lost a franchise record tying 9 games in a row. They've only won 7 games over the past 2 seasons. As a franchise, nobody's won fewer games than the 10 that they've won since 2017. Now, that obviously predates Pat Shurmur by a year. But you just look at the poor coaching. You look at this team making the same mistakes over and over. You look at the poor clock management. They just don't seem to be ready to play week in and week out. Defensively, a total coverage breakdown on the back end on the Zach Ertz game-winning touchdown where neither Alec Ogletree or Michael Thomas, 2 captains, had any idea what was happening, and Ertz was wide open for the game-winning score. You pile all of that together, and you look at the schedule, and it's the Miami Dolphins, it's Washington, and it's the Eagles again. Really, Brooks, there's nothing he can do over these next 3 weeks that can change any sort of opinion of ownership or anyone else. So unless he was given an assurance that wins and losses don't matter, I don't know how he's back. And I've been told a month ago that the Giants were already kicking the tires on coaching candidates. So this is a conversation and a thought process inside that building and in the ownership suite that is nothing new, but has been ongoing.
And we're visiting, of course, with Matt Lombardo of NJ.com talking New York Giants. So what about general manager? What about the front office? I mean, is the front office going to go with Shurmur? Where is John Mara, the owner, on that whole situation? Because I know you've addressed this.
Yeah, twice now we've tried to talk to John Mara after the games, and twice he hasn't broken stride on his walk out of the stadium and looked very annoyed at even the line of questioning. So we don't know where John Mara stands, but I'll say this, that I believe from talking to people around the league that general manager Dave Gettleman is in legitimate trouble here. And how can he be? I wrote about this a couple weeks ago that a lot of the shine is off that 2017 draft class. Lorenzo Carter, an outside linebacker, third-round pick, hasn't taken a step forward. Will Hernandez, their second-round pick, has taken a step backwards at left guard. They had to trade a third-round pick, which could be 66 overall this year, to replace B.J. Hill with Leonard Williams, who's a free agent at the end of the year. That trade made 0 sense. And you just look at that trade in particular, the Leonard Williams trade, taking Saquon Barkley number 2 overall without trying to scare a trade package out of the Jets or any other quarterback needy team to add draft capital. Daniel Jones kind of being inconsistent. And you just look at the fact that Dave Gettleman seems over his head in terms of the NFL in 2019, both in terms of positional value and draft capital value. And I just don't know, if you're John Mara watching all of this unfold, how you don't go out and bring in a forward-thinking, analytics-driven front office, whether that's Louis Riddick, Ed Dodds from the Indianapolis Colts, their assistant general manager, Daniel Jeremiah, any of these forward-thinking general managers with a new wave, new age head coach. I don't know how you don't do all of those things based on the fact that the giant way, so to speak, has been a colossal failure for the better part of half a decade.
Now, is Daniel Jones, I mean, we've talked, it's been interesting to talk to you throughout the season, and we've talked to you when Daniel Jones wasn't playing at the very beginning, and when he was playing all right, he started with a bang and then kind of played like a rookie quarterback, as you would expect him to play, everybody except apparently Gettleman and Shermer, but is what we're talking about right now somewhat of a referendum on Daniel Jones, because going forward now, the optimism really isn't there. Whereas if we had been having this conversation 2 months ago, there would have been more optimism. Wasn't that really based on Daniel Jones?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was, Brooks, and I think a lot of this season, as soon as you went to Daniel Jones back in week 3, the only thing that mattered was his development and getting him as many snaps as possible. And I think there are a lot of nice things that he's done. You go back to the game last week against the Packers, that touchdown pass to Sterling Shepard in the snow, the touchdown pass he made with 2 defenders at his feet in the collapsing pocket on 4th down to Golden Tate against the Bears on the road. That was one of the more impressive throws I've seen any quarterback make this season. So he's done a lot of nice things. There are some things that you can feel optimistic about. But when you're turning over the football 21 times in 11 starts, it's next to impossible to win in the NFL and win consistently at that level with that high of a turnover rate. So until he improves his ball security in the pocket, until he makes some more sound decisions with the football, I don't know that you can anoint him as a franchise quarterback. And the Giants are going to be picking number 2 overall. And what's going to be fascinating here is that Chase Young, I believe, has the chance to be a generational talent in the long line of generational talents of Ohio State pass rushers, right? You look at Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, and now Chase Young. You have a chance to put a building block player like that on defense. You take him. But if it's a new GM, and if that new GM is Louis Riddick or Daniel Jeremiah or Ed Dodds or any of these other forward-thinking general managers, are they going to watch Daniel Jones and say, that's my guy? Or are they going to want to take the number 2 pick and invest it into a Tua Tagovailoa if he's available and healthy, or trade up for Joe Burrow if they can get him? Because I think Daniel Jones has done a lot of nice things, and I think if this front office structure is in place, he's their guy. But if it's a clean slate, if it's a full house cleaning in the front office and the coaching staff, I don't think that they're married to Daniel Jones.
Wow, dude, that's amazing that you're saying this, because I've talked about the Giants in the context of Burrow, and people look at me like I've got 3 heads. But what you're essentially saying is, if Gettleman's in place, if that regime's in place, no chance. You're looking at a Chase Young. Not that that's necessarily a bad pick at all, but you think that there is a possibility, depending on what happens with the front office, that a Joe Burrow trading up could be in play for the Giants. And what about Louis Riddick? Where is that coming from? I mean, give me a little background on what your thought process is with Louis Riddick.
Yeah, Brooks, first of all, let's touch on the Daniel Jones thing. I think
Sure.
It's a slim possibility that Burrow would be on their board, even with a new staff, because I think that John Mara's mandate was to get the franchise quarterback in 2019. That's why they passed on Josh Allen. That's why they took Daniel Jones at number 6. But a new GM and a new front office, I think it presents a little bit of a wild card and something to really keep an eye on. I think the likelihood is Daniel Jones is their quarterback moving forward, but I don't think that it's a certainty with a whole new coaching staff and new GM. We saw what happened in Arizona just this year with Josh Rosen. As far as Louis Riddick goes, he interviewed for the job this past off before they hired Dave Gettleman. So he was on their short list previously, and he's a guy that when you talk to him, he would have still taken Saquon Barkley over Sam Darnold, but I think he understands the value of having a franchise quarterback. I think that you look at his analysis on ESPN, you look at the fact that he's had success in other front offices. He's a guy that would be at the top of the candidate list for me, one of the top 2 or 3 choices. And then I look at Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network, and I think that he's a guy that when you follow these mock drafts and draft boards and draft analytics over the last couple of years, he's been as spot on as anybody, in my opinion, in terms of what he's prognosticated. He's also a guy who has front office experience. And you look at the Raiders just this year going out and getting Mike Mayock from a very similar role and the success they've already had out there and starting to build something there. I think he would be a very interesting name to keep an eye on. But as far as Riddick goes, the front office experience, the experience in Philadelphia in a winning culture with Andy Reid and his analysis on ESPN, plus the Giants' previous interest in him, that if they move on from Gettleman, I think he's on their list once again.
Well, that's great information. Matt Lombardo is with us from NJ.com. What do you think, speaking of prognostication, we've been talking, I mean, that's the only thing you have with the Giants, really.
Right.
But what about Eli Manning? What do you think his future is?
Yeah, I think that he wants to play again next year. Obviously, there's no future with the New York Giants with Eli Manning, whether it's Daniel Jones, Joe Burrow, or any other quarterback. Again, I think it will be Jones. But I think that last night, what we saw in the first half, and I wrote this immediately after the game, there's something to be said for having a savvy veteran quarterback when you have such a young supporting cast like Darius Slayton, the 5th-round rookie. You saw what he did in the first half. 5 catches on 6 targets for 156 yards and 2 scores. Saquon Barkley looked a lot like Saquon Barkley again. And I think part of that is the ability of Eli Manning to get the offensive line in the right blocking schemes for the running game and all of those things. I think that last night's first half was an audition for a team like the Bears, who are probably close if they, need to go out and get a veteran quarterback. You look around some of the other teams, maybe, and this would be ultimate irony, wouldn't it, that Eli Manning wouldn't go to San Diego when he was drafted, but they're moving on from Phillip Rivers. Maybe Eli Manning winds up in LA in that Colossus new stadium, and the Giants go and play him next year. So those are 2 teams to watch, but I think that Eli Manning's future is somewhere in the NFL next year with a team, maybe the Buffalo Bills, maybe the Carolina Panthers, depending on what they do with Cam Newton, a veteran team who's close to winning but needs a veteran quarterback. Those are the teams to keep an eye on for Eli Manning in 2020.
We talked about the front office possibilities there, where we might see that situation going. What about coach? If Shermer's not back, if he's gone, who are some of the candidates there?
Yeah, I think there's some real noise, some real fire to the smoke, rather, with the Jason Garrett report from Ian Rappaport a couple weeks ago. I know. I mean, put it this way. He played for the Giants, right? He understands the New York media. I think that he has a talented roster there, and I think Jerry Jones is the poison in that barrel, not necessarily Jason Garrett. I think he's a name to watch. Matt Rule, I think, is very popular if he doesn't wind up getting another Power 5 job. I think that he would be a guy that they would pick up the phone and interview immediately. John DeFilippo, the offensive coordinator for the Jaguars, did terrific things, took Carson Wentz from about where Daniel Jones was as a rookie. And I tend to think that Daniel Jones is more equipped as a rookie than Carson Wentz was. But during that first training camp in 2017, DeFilippo changed and altered Wentz's throwing motion a little bit. And all of a sudden, he was an MVP candidate. He's the best quarterback developer in the league. So DeFilippo is a guy that I would call. And then Josh McDaniels. If you can pry him away from New England and from being the head coach in waiting, surpassing Bill Belichick, I think McDaniels makes a lot of sense for the Giants as well.
Last thing on the Giants, when you're looking at Daniel Jones, to me, the real question is, do you see him reading defenses? Do you see a guy who has the ability to eventually reach that level? I mean, you can't expect a first-year guy. It really doesn't have a level of sophistication. Do you see progress, or did you see something that was static this year with him?
From that aspect of it, Brooks, I think that it happens with all quarterbacks, right? Backup quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks, their first few starts, you go back to the Tampa Bay game, I thought he was phenomenal in that regard. A little bit better against Washington. But you start to get tape on this guy, and the more that he's out there, defensive coordinators start to figure him out. We saw it with Kyle Allen down in Carolina. You saw it with Jones a little bit here. I feel like since the summertime, he's regressed in that area a little bit, and I think that Saquon Barkley's lack of production, now part of it might be he wasn't fully healthy, but part of it is I don't know how great Daniel Jones was with reading front seven alignments and figuring out what to do to get the running game in the right sets and all of those things. I think that, that's something where he needs to improve going into the offseason. That first offseason, and Doug Peterson talked about this on a conference call last week, that first offseason for a rookie quarterback, that's where you make the biggest leap. And Jones has to do his part. But Brooks, the Giants have to do their part too. Let's look at the young quarterbacks around the league. The Eagles, after Wentz's first year, they went and got him Alshon Jeffrey. Lamar Jackson, he's an MVP candidate this year. They drafted Hollywood Brown, a speedster, and even though the production's not there, he's taking the top off the defense and commanding that respect. Jared Goff, they went and got Brandon Brooks. You know this from being out in LA. They got him going into his third year. They go to a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes, they get him Tyreek Hill. The Giants don't have that speedy, game-breaking wide receiver that opens up things for the running game, that creates opportunities over the top. Now, maybe Darius Slayton develops into that, but how great would this offense look with Emmanuel Sanders on one side, Darius Slayton on the other, and Sterling Shepard in the slot with Evan Ingram and Barkley? That's a lot better than what they're putting out there right now for Daniel Jones. So Jones needs to improve, yes, and I think that he's the type of kid who wants to get better, but the Giants need to bolster the speed and the talent in his supporting cast if he's ever going to be a franchise quarterback.
Visiting with Matt Lombardo, NJ.com. And before we let you go, I want to ask you about Penn State. I had been reporting that James Franklin was in play here at SC. In fact, he was really the only, Urban Meyer was not in play. James Franklin was really the only major name in play here at SC for the job with the Trojans. One thing you may not have heard, but I have heard on the grapevine that there's a lot of prominent USC football alumni that was interested in ushering in the first African-American head coach of the USC football program. And that really would have been a major moment had James Franklin been interested to the extent that he would come out here and coach USC. What do you think about James Franklin at Penn State? Do you think he's there for the long haul? I mean, what are your impressions of him?
Yeah, I'm one of the bigger believers in James Franklin and what they're building at Penn State. I think they're close. I think that he has his most talented roster that he's had at Penn State coming back next season. And I think that they're going to be ranked somewhere in the 6 or 7 range next year and probably a playoff favorite along with Ohio State. And I think it's almost playoff or bust for him next year. But I think that the steady recruiting talent pools of top 12, top 10 classes over the last 3 or 4 years is really starting to pay dividends right at a time where he's hitting his peak as an in-game coach. I think the biggest thing for him with this contract extension was one, getting a commitment from the university to improve the facilities, because I've been up there. I'm a season ticket holder. I've also covered their pro days. I think they're lacking compared to the Alabamas, Ohio States, and Clemson's in terms of their training facilities. I think that James needed a commitment in terms of the amount of resources to hire a staff, because I think hiring an elite offensive coordinator is top priority if they're going to take that next step. But I think the drive, the motivation, his ability as a coach is there. And he said on that HBO special featuring Penn State that his career goal is to become the first African-American head coach to win a national championship. I think getting to a USC, my fear was that USC was going to hire him away this offseason because there's an easier path to the playoffs. There's a stronger recruiting pool in Southern California, and I think that his personality fits best there. But if he can get a firm commitment from the university for the long term, I think it's going to be difficult for him to be pried away. He's a Pennsylvania kid, played his college ball at East Stroudsburg, 45 minutes away from State College. So I think that this is as close to a dream job as you're going to get for him. But if USC breaks the bank with an offer for him in a year or two, that's the one job that I think, as long as he's linked to that program, there's going to be a lot of trepidation in State College in the state of Pennsylvania about James Franklin going there.
Boy, it sounds to me like this could be a destination job for him if the administration and, well, really it comes down to the donors are willing to throw in the money that they need to upgrade the facilities, upgrade the coaching staff, pool for salaries, and that's the bottom line is salaries for coaches and the facilities. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think that was the biggest sticking point, and I think there might have been some frustration behind the scenes between Penn State and Franklin on that regard. He seems like he's constantly trying to pull on the purse strings to get them to take that next step. You heard the speech from going from a great program to an elite program after losing to Ohio State by 1 point last year. I think there's a lot to that, not just on the field, but in terms of the commitment from the administration. And I think as long as they make that commitment, I think it's going to be unlikely that he leaves. But again, as I said, there's a easier path to the playoff and to a national championship for James Franklin, in my opinion, at USC than there is at Penn State. But I don't know that there's anything more rewarding for Franklin being from Pennsylvania with the roots and what he's established in Penn State than winning a title with the Nittany Lions.
Well, now, when it comes to the culture of Penn State, and you talk about the facilities, I'm sure some people would be shocked to hear that maybe they don't have the facilities that you might have at Ohio State or in Alabama, the very top elite programs. Does that stem from the fact that Paterno, you could argue with that culture, was somewhat of a lower maintenance guy?
I don't think there was
and that's still there
for that. I don't think that was ever the need for that. I think that Paterno, he walked into any living room during the peak of his career and even on the back end, and he walked out with that recruit because it was the idea of playing for Joe Paterno, one of the legends to ever coach the game. And I think that in a lot of ways, James Franklin is trying to drag Penn State from that late 80s, early 90s mindset in terms of the commitment to facilities and to coaching staff, because Paterno's staff stayed with him for decades, but that's just not the climate of today's college football, where you follow the dollar signs and you follow the opportunities. So I think that Franklin is trying to drag the university and the administration into the 2020s, where the top dollar rules and the top facility rules. And I think they've done a nice job of that. The facilities have improved little by little under James Franklin. I think that you look at some of the hires that he's made, look at Joe Brady, the passing game coordinator at LSU, probably a top candidate for offensive coordinator jobs. He's gotten Ricky Ronnie a head coaching job at Old Dominion, Joe Moorhead an SEC head coaching job. So I think that Franklin is, to me, one of the elite up-and-coming coaches in college football, and he's trying to get the rest of the program and the university to elevate to that level as well.
Great information, man. I can't thank you enough, man. Thanks for coming on again.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me, and happy holidays.
You too. That's Matt Lombardo. Does a great job for NJ.com, Newark Star Ledger. Phenomenal on the Giants and Penn State and Rutgers. It doesn't get any better than that. And man, it is a joy here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred to be able to go around the country and talk to the people that are there every single day. And he's obviously a Penn State guy and covers the Giants beat and is right there with Rutgers. But there's a lot of other things that we talk to about people than just their beat. And that's a great example. And coming up, we're going to talk to the guy who's at the heart of the SEC West, Ole Miss. But not just Ole Miss, the whole environment, the whole situation, and that would be Neil McCready. That's coming up. I hope you stick around here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We do this every single day, weekdays. We're also going to talk here shortly to Ian Steele from ABC6 in Providence, because we want to cover what's going on with the Patriots, and we're going to talk some boxing. A guy who was in Saudi Arabia for the Ruiz Joshua fight, Mike Coppinger. That's going to be coming up at the top of the hour. But now we're going to bring in Ian Steele from ABC6 in Providence and talk a little bit about what's going on with the Patriots, because you can't swing a dead cat without hitting the Patriots and the news of the Patriots and the intrigue and what's going on with Belichick and Brady. It's unbelievable. Ian, I can't thank you enough for joining us, man. I really appreciate it.
For having me on.
So what's the very latest on the situation with the videographer, the Bengals, and all that stuff?
Well, there's a new report today that came out this morning that apparently, according to sources that are talking to The Athletic, that the videographer that was in Cleveland taping the Cincinnati Browns game was apparently filming the Bengals sideline for about 8 minutes. And that is a very interesting development, considering when you're shooting B-roll and you just want a quick shot of something, it usually doesn't take 8 minutes to get it. But apparently a new report coming out that they were taping.
What's your Spidey sense
telling
you on this story? I mean, that's the $1 million question, but you're around the team, cover the team. I mean, what's your sixth sense telling you in this situation? Put it this way. I'm not asking you to definitively give me a judgment on it, but is this a story that you think is going to get some legs here?
Absolutely, it's going to get some sort of legs, considering you combine the Patriots and videotaping opponents. And whenever those two things come up, and I said it on the news last night, the ears are going to start to perk up, and you are really going to, tune in and listen. So yeah, whether it's something or it's nothing, it's still going to get some play locally, nationally, wherever you go. And whenever you think about the Patriots, even now, 3 Super Bowls after Spygate, the original Spygate, it still comes up that, they're bending the rules, and, fans are chirping them about possibly being cheaters. So of course this is going to get some legs and continue to be talked about.
Do you think this do your job thing that they do now, these features that you can watch on the web, is that really the big difference between what we're talking about now and what we were talking about before?
The progress that has been made with online content and the changing media landscape, yes, and the craft sports production has been at the forefront of that. I mean, they produce their preseason games themselves. It's not like they bring in an external sort of company to do that for them. They run it themselves. The preseason games are presented by Craft Sports Productions, and you go on Patriots.com and it's all their own stuff. And some, they were at the forefront of, they were one of the first NFL teams to even have their own website and produce their own content back when Mike Reese, I believe, was doing it, who works for ESPN right now. So the interesting part of this is you see the Yahoo article that says during the original Spygate, the first excuse apparently that those videographers came up with was that they work for Craft Sports Productions, which is the first thing that you hear of this time around. Now, Craft Sports Productions and the Do Your Job web series is more prominent. More people see it because of the development of social media. But it's just kind of
I know. It's like we're all kind of in the same boat. We're all hesitating as we're talking. You really don't know what to say anymore in terms of this situation. So we're visiting with Ian Steele of ABC6 in Providence, covers the Patriots beat. And so what is the approach right now of the local media? Obviously, you're in the local media. I mean, what do you think is going to be the approach going forward? And compare that to the national media. Is there going to be a difference there in how this story is covered?
That's an interesting question. You see yesterday, as soon as the point is made that this was a Do Your Job Craft Sports production crew, as soon as that came out, you saw kind of a line drawn with, reporters that were trying to cover it and asking questions and getting feedback back that said, okay, well then that was the quickest, Patriots controversy that we've ever seen. It lasted about 15 minutes. But more stories start to come out. It was an 8-minute taping, and the NFL is continuing to investigate it and things like that. It seems like whichever way the wind blows, based on what hour it is, that seems to be the take that's made nationally. And Bill Belichick was even asked this yesterday on his weekly radio appearance on WEEI. ESPN is going with it and talking about it like it's an advanced scout that was doing the taping, not a film crew or anything like that. So locally, you can tell, and obviously there are reasons behind all of this to just maintain your credibility on the beat and with whatever sources you may have, that you can't bury the Patriots on, the first drop of a dime. So there's a line drawn and there's a line that's being walked upon.
That's got to be a really
locally,
tough gig. It goes without saying that you need access and you need to deal with people. And when you have Diane Rossini, and I'm not criticizing her, she's covering the story. We don't know where her sources are coming from. We don't know, what she's tweeting out there, if that's necessarily true or not. But I think the bottom line in the situation is, for at least from what I can tell, is there is a tape, right? I mean, is that your understanding, that there is a tape out there and that the NFL has it and perhaps the Bengals have it, and that's where everybody's going with this story?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. That seems to be what has been reported. The SD card was taken out of the camera in Cleveland, given to the Bengals, and then given to the NFL. And apparently that tape is being reviewed. Someone who apparently saw the tape, I'm getting feedback here. I'm sorry about that. Someone who apparently saw the tape said that there was 8 minutes of sideline video on there. So, but apparently there is a tape. People have seen it.
We are visiting with Ian Steele of ABC6 in Providence. As you cover this story, how much of your priority now is going to be on the Bengals as a typical guy covering the story for the local media up in New England? How much are you going to be covering the game now, and how much are you going to be covering this story every day as you go towards game time?
I'll tell you right now, I'm really looking forward to going to Foxborough tomorrow for Bill Belichick's weekly press conference and the open locker room session, because I think it's going to be one of those Bill Belichick press conferences that you replay for years and years. I don't think you can cover this game without mentioning it, because it's a part of the conversation. It's a part of the storyline of this season and of the game that they're preparing for.
Ian, I can't thank you enough for jumping on. I know it's a real busy time. You're getting ready for the game. Thank you so much for giving us the very latest up there. That's Ian Steele of ABC6 in Providence, giving us the very latest up in New England as to what's going on. And he's in a tough situation, really tough, from a practical standpoint as a media member. And believe me, I've been in those situations many, many times. I've covered the NFL for, a major media outlet in Kansas City, for instance. That's one example. I covered USC out here for the flagship station. I covered Ohio State for the flagship station in Columbus, where you've got to keep up appearances. You need access. You need people to not be pissed off at you. And so the people who can come up with information on that basis, proprietary information, and that's a very tough situation to deal with. And by the way, we will have Mike Coppinger coming up. I have heard from him, Cam Smith, our producer. I have heard from Mike, and we will be. If you want to move him later to the show, Cam, we can do that and talk some boxing. But if you want to do Neil McCready now, that would be great too, of rebelgrove.com. Does a great job covering Ole Miss. And we're going to be talking to Neil here in a second, who's outstanding. And he's got a podcast that's online. You can watch it on YouTube. It's phenomenal. Giving us information on what's going on with not only Ole Miss, of course, but what's going on in the SEC and college football. Neil, I can't thank you enough, man. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun to be with you.
And so you're the one that broke the Lane Kiffin stuff going to Ole Miss. So tell us about that process, how he ended up at Ole Miss.
Well, Ole Miss made the decision, I guess. They finished their season on Thanksgiving night, lost to Mississippi State, went 4-8. I think the plan had always been to give Matt Luke one more year. That game did not end in a way that was very appeasing to the fan base, to the alumni base, to the donor base. There was a kind of a 2-day groundswell in the immediate aftermath of the loss to Mississippi State. That was that game where, if you remember, the Elijah Moore did the little,
how can we forget?
How can anybody forget? It was one of those crazy deals that it ended up. I don't think that moment caused a decision to make a change, but I think it ended up pushing everything over the edge. And then when they got to that Sunday and they fired Matt Luke, we broke that story. And I heard two names right away. I'd kind of been working on it just in case, and You heard a lot of Mike Norvell at Memphis, and you heard a lot of Lane Kiffin at FAU. And there were some other names, Billy Napier, Elia Drinkwitz, some names like that. But the more you dug into it, the more that you could see two things. Three things. One, Mike Norvell was not going to go to Ole Miss. He's at Memphis. It's 70 miles away. He really cares about his legacy at Miami. He knew that if he went to Florida State, Memphis would always love him for what he had accomplished at Memphis. If he went to Ole Miss, it would immediately disappear. They would immediately hate him. And he didn't want that. So people can criticize that or whatever, but it is what it is. That's what he wanted. And then the second thing was Lane Kiffin wanted this job. He looked at this job. He wanted to return to the SEC, and he had two opportunities that he knew of, maybe three if you included Missouri, but I don't think his deal with Missouri ever got any traction at all. Arkansas wanted him, but he looked at that Arkansas roster. He looked at what had happened the last couple of years where they had gone from Brett Bielema to Chad Morris, and he said, that is a long rebuild. That is a slog. And then if you draw the circle around Fayetteville, it's not as full of prospects as the circle around Oxford just because of geographics. And so he looked at Ole Miss. His brother had been here. Chris Kiffin had been on Hugh Freeze's staff years ago when they had some success before all the NCAA thing tore it down. And he looked at it and said, that's a job that I want. It's my understanding from talking to a lot of people that he really couldn't get any traction on Monday. But then on Tuesday, Ole Miss kind of agreed to listen to him. I think they talked to him on Wednesday via a setup similar to the one you and I are on right now. They liked what they heard. They liked what they saw. And then on Thursday, as it became more and more obvious to Ole Miss that their pursuit of Mike Norvell was a waste of time, they decided to focus more energy on Kiffin. They went down there to see him on Thursday of last week after he had finished their practice getting ready for the CUSA championship game. They liked what they saw. They liked what they heard. And then the other thing that happened, and there's no denying it, is and I don't want to be the one that takes credit for it, but we do a daily podcast, and that Tuesday morning I said, if you can't get Mike Norvell, for whatever reason, you have to hire Kiffin. And the reason is, if you're Ole Miss, why not try to make a splash right now? You're 4-8, 2-6 in the league. If it weren't for Arkansas and Vanderbilt on your schedule, you're not winning games. You can't. People say, well, it could get worse. It can't really get that much worse. When you're 4-8, 2-6, much worse doesn't really matter. It's the same result. Go for it now. Is there risk? Sure. There's absolutely risk with Lane Kiffin. Absolutely. Is there upside? There's absolutely upside. And so it's a risk-reward thing. And I think they decided that the reward was worth it. And by Thursday, Keith Carter, the new athletics director at Ole Miss, his inbox was completely overrun with people saying, if you don't do this, I'm out. And if you do this, I'm buying tickets again.
It's amazing that you're telling us about it. And I 1,000% subscribe to what you're saying about the influence that you had, the media has. We just got off the line with Matt Lombardo at NJ.com, and they had, not necessarily as cheerleaders, but they gave voice to the fans, just reporting what the fans were saying about the Rutgers situation at NJ.com. And in my mind, we saw the pushback from the administration and Pat Hobbs and the AD at Rutgers. Well, they did a 180 when all of a sudden all of the fans are being reported in the newspapers, in the media, because of those outlets, that they were going to take Rutgers out of their will, let alone cancel their season tickets and their donations. That's the level that it got to. And I believe that was the push that got Schiano into Rutgers. And I have no doubt, and I know you have a huge following in what you do, that was a factor. I also understand from my own sources. It's funny because I was talking to somebody about Florida State, and I have been told, a couple of different sources had told me that Lane Kiffin was in play at Florida State. And I talked to a couple of college football national writers, and when I told them that, they laughed. Oh, my God, Lane Kiffin at Florida State. And I'm like, why not? And this is well before the Ole Miss situation. I wanted to ask you, though, about Luke and the state of the program, and what's your assessment of the decision to move on from him? What's the bottom line?
Well, the bottom line is twofold. One, when you're a college football coach in the SEC, you have two jobs. One is to win games. Two is to fill a stadium. He didn't win games, and the stadium was half full. Now, is that all his fault? No,
Could he
of
have
course
done
not.
that though in the future? What was his ceiling? Was that sold short?
I think he was getting it's a little complex, and I'll be quick with it. Number one, he never got the benefit of a complete buy-in. Like you saw what happened with Lane Kiffin yesterday, right? He flies into Oxford, and there's thousands of people on the tarmac, and he's literally asked to kiss babies, literally. And they do the press conference at the basketball arena, which is called the Pavilion at Ole Miss, and they drop the scoreboard down to the ground, and there's 4,000 people in there, and they're chanting his name. It's almost like a political rally for a political candidate that has a real shot to win, okay? It was that kind of a feel to it. Matt Luke never got that. Matt Luke was an interim coach who replaced a Hugh Freeze, who left amid scandal in July of right before a season started, literally days, Brooks, before a fall camp began. So he walks in. It's just it's a scramble. People are trying to steal their players, and all year long, the Ole Miss administration said, we're going to conduct a national search. We're going to hire a national guy, and then they hire Matt Luke. Doesn't work. People say, oh, it was a scam. It was a fix. You never intended to do it. And then, of course, he's having to rebuild a roster that was left decimated by Freeze, by the NCAA sanctions, all that stuff in the SEC West. It's almost impossible. There were some signs this year that they were making real progress. There were some signs this year that winning was on the horizon. But here's the problem. Next season, in Ole Miss's first 7 games, they play Baylor, they play Auburn, LSU, Alabama, and Florida. Go check out the AP Top 10 poll and see where those teams are. So you've got these games. So if you looked ahead and you were Ole Miss and you said, okay, realistically 2-5 opening the season is on the table, and that's giving them a win at Vanderbilt, giving them a win over Southeast Missouri. So we'll do that. 2-5 is on the table. What would 2-5 look like to the bottom line? What would 2-5 look like in attendance? What would 2-5 look like from a morale standpoint? And the answers are complete disaster. Now, if you bring in Lane Kiffin or someone like Lane Kiffin, in this case, Mike Norvell, Lane Kiffin, and you open with the exact same record, people are disappointed. People are worried, but you still have buy-in. People are still coming to the games because it's a new coach. He's able to blame it all on the previous. It's kind of like politics, right? The new president comes in, and no matter Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. The new president comes in and blames the old president. And then after a while, you can't blame anymore, and he's up for re-election, and now he either wins or loses on his own accord. That's sort of where this is. Lane Kiffin gets to come in and be year one president, saying everything's the other guy's fault.
Visiting with Neil McCready of rebelgrove.com. Rivals does an unbelievable job covering Ole Miss. And the elephant in the room, if you're following this story, is, of course, the elephant in the room, and no pun intended, I should say, when you're talking about college coach vacancies at all times, and that's Jimmy Sexton. And what role did Jimmy Sexton play as the representative of Lane Kiffin in this situation, and as it pertains to Arkansas?
Well, as you know, he's the most powerful guy in college football. To me, there's no question about it. Now that Mike Slive is no longer with us, I think Jimmy Sexton's the most popular person in college athletics. It's my opinion, and I think Jimmy Sexton would disagree with this. It's my opinion that Lane Kiffin's candidacy at Arkansas was strong, but there was some dissent. How powerful was that dissent? I don't know. I don't know that Jerry Jones was completely on board. We heard that. I don't know that John Tyson Chickens, a lot of money. Those are big Arkansas people. I don't know that they were completely on board.
Wow.
And so Arkansas has this powerful board of directors, or whatever they call it, board of trustees, whatever.
Donors, whale donors.
I should know. I should know. My daughter is a freshman at the University of Arkansas. I should know what the titles are. But I don't think they were completely on board, and it left this crack. And Ole Miss moved in on it. And then I think when Ole Miss moved in on it, Jimmy Sexton had what he needs, which is 2 schools interested. 1 school moved quickly. And I think Sexton wanted, and Kiffin wanted to get back into the SEC. I think Sexton wanted to get Kiffin back in the SEC. It stands to reason. There's nothing criminal about that. And as soon as Ole Miss got aggressive, I think Arkansas was kind of left in the cold.
You led me into a question I was going to ask earlier in the conversation. I'm glad you brought it up. And that is Jerry Jones and Tyson. And that's how these major jobs are normally filled. That's behind the scenes, but that's the reality. Certainly that's how it has worked at USC. The reason that Helton right now is still at SC is because that's not happening right now at USC. The president is actually involved in hiring the head coach for once, because she's been brought in to try to push that to the rear for now, where the people who donate money make the decisions within the athletic department, and who's the head football coach is always the biggest decision. So we talked about Jerry Jones and, of course, the Dallas Cowboys owner and a big Arkansas booster, alum, you name it. But what about Ole Miss, and what about that dynamic? Do you have a similar situation there? Do you have big-time donors, or is it more the president is the athletic director, or do we have a search firm? And you talked about Lane Kiffin's assessment of Arkansas as part of the reason he ends up at Ole Miss, but you also talked about a possible subtle pushback on Kiffin from those donors at Arkansas. So what really is the bottom line, and what is that leadership dynamic that hires the head coach at Ole Miss?
So at Ole Miss, we're in the middle of kind of a change. Those of us who are following the program are noticing a change within the dynamics there. Frankly, a lot of the people who have controlled those kind of decisions are getting older. They've made some decisions that were not popular with the fans, that were not popular with younger alums, and there was pushback. It is my opinion that Keith Carter, the new AD, literally has been on the job a couple of weeks. Walks in and gets the job. He fires Matt Luke because of alumni pushback. And I think it was mostly younger pushback. A lot of the older money people wanted to give Matt Luke more time. They liked Matt Luke. Matt Luke's an Ole Miss guy. He played at Ole Miss. His dad played at Ole Miss. His brother was a quarterback at Ole Miss. He's married into a prominent Oxford family that is all Ole Miss. I mean,
that's amazing that they.
I don't mean this in a bad way.
I didn't know that. I mean, that they fired him, and under those circumstances.
But the
really
people
amazing.
spoke.
Well,
right?
I mean,
it's incredible. Literally, the day that Matt Luke got fired, noon that day, there was a lot of smoke about it, and I kept telling people, guys, do you all know who is in Matt Luke's corner on this?
Yeah.
Big names in Dickie Scruggs, big names in Matt Luke's corner on this. Archie Manning. There are people that are all Matt Luke on this. But when the masses got so loud, empty stadiums speak volumes.
Let me just tell you, and I've been really outspoken on this, Neil. I feel really bad for Elijah Moore, because I don't feel like, I mean, we saw DK Metcalf do it 2 years earlier. All right. Exact same thing. And I put it on my Twitter. Yeah. And listen, on this show, I played the video of Metcalf right next. I'm probably the only show in the country. You guys, I'm sure, covered it, but we played the video back, and Odell Beckham did it for the New York Giants during an NFL game. So this is an unsportsmanlike celebration penalty. Yeah, it's dumb. Yeah, it's right in the middle of a really bad timing situation. But the
timing was awful.
But here's what, I mean, my impression is, in talking to you, learning more about the situation and how things worked out, it reminds me of a little bit of the criticism and the type of criticism that Willie Taggart was getting in the middle of the season from very influential media people on a national basis. And I think we saw an explosion of that, unjustifiably so, especially coming from a very credible, high-profile college football writer from Yahoo, who you probably know, Pete Thamel. You see the level of criticism that I thought was hugely unjustified and unfair. And so now in talking to you, it really sounds like that was a legitimate factor in what happened. Or was it? I mean, I don't know.
No, I think it was, because it happens on a Thursday night, 4 seconds to go in a game. He scores a touchdown and clearly does what was a premeditated celebration. He clearly had, I'm putting words in his mouth, but I feel pretty confident with this. He had decided, hey, if I score a touchdown in this game, I'm going to do the dog pee thing. And 4 seconds left. That makes it 21-20. And So a handful of things happen. So let's go through this. One, the penalty comes. It's 15 yards, makes the extra point, a 35-yard kick. He misses it.
He didn't miss it, though. Moore didn't miss it, and it was a typical kick. And
no. But what happened was while that happens on the sideline, ESPN catches him with the wrestling belt, the NWO, which is there when they had AJ Brown and DK Metcalf and all those guys. That was their thing. NWO, and whoever scored last had the belt. And so he's got the belt on. It's not the greatest look. You missed the extra point. The other thing that happened was, keep this in mind, it became obvious that Matt Luke, had there not been a penalty, was going to kick an extra point. They weren't even going to go for two there. And there was a large contingent of the fan base that immediately said, oh, my God, he's so conservative. Why wouldn't you just go for two there? What's the difference between 4 and 8, 5 and 7? Let's take one play from the 2.5-yard line and let winner take all.
Right.
He wasn't going to do that. He was going to kick an extra point. He missed it. And then Elijah Moore is out on the ensuing onside kick, which people took, and it was unfair, but people took this and said, see, it's a discipline thing. And then nothing happened on Friday, but on Saturday morning, that column runs. And that column got, because of his stature as a writer, because of his audience as a writer, that column went the equivalent of viral. And all of a sudden, on the Saturday of rivalry day, you've got the Iron Bowl, and you've got Florida State, and you've got all these games all over the country, and people are talking about Elijah Moore, and it pushed it from, okay, well, we're 4 and 8 and we suck, to now we're 4 and 8 and we suck and we're the national embarrassment, and this is not acceptable. And that's what started the movement.
And you know what happened there? There was an opening. There was a chasm, a vacuum, where normally if that just happens on a Saturday, and we just move through the NFL and we go into Monday, and it's no big deal. But do you think that played a role because of the unique timing of the Egg Bowl, and then we had this kind of dead period? And then you have as credible college football, and that is a compliment to Pete Thamel. But I think he was really, really unfair in characterizing it that
I said as much to him. I remember retweeting his tweet and saying, kind of quote tweeting it, saying, you're a better journalist than I'll ever be. You've made it further in this than I'll ever make it. But that feels hyperbolic. That it was the most embarrassing thing to ever happen in college football. Is like, man, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, what's the difference between 4 and 8, 5 and 7? What's the difference in Mississippi State going? Where are they now? They're in the Music City Bowl. Had they lost the game, they don't go to the Music City Bowl. I mean, we're not talking about something that impacts who makes the playoff or who wins the national title or who wins a conference title. We're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about the difference between 4 and 8 and 5 and 7, 5 and 7 and 6 and 6. We're just not talking. That was not that big of a story, and making the kid who did obviously a ridiculously dumb thing in the moment, when you go back and think about what it potentially cost
happens
his team,
every weekend.
Yeah, making him the scapegoat, it felt to me, to me it was just wrong. I felt bad for the kid. I felt bad for the whole situation, and so now you've got people sarcastically saying, hey. And it's sarcastic, but in some ways it's basically true. As crazy as it is, he may have saved Joe Moorhead's job at Mississippi State. Joe Moorhead gets another year. I think they were absolutely going to fire him and move on. We'd already heard that they had been in but backs. How these things happen. They happen kind of in the back stages where the coaches have plausible deniability until the final moment. There's a lot of talk about Billy Napier, who's at Louisiana Lafayette, becoming the next head coach at Mississippi State, and all of a sudden, Joe Moorhead gets another year because that game is such a big game to the Mississippi State people, and they get it. And you see what happens with Matt Luke. 72 hours later, he's out of a job.
I was just going to ask you, man. You're amazing because you're anticipating, you're answering all of my questions. It's awesome. But I was just going to ask you about the status of Joe Moorhead and what the hell happened to Mississippi State this year and the state of that program. What's your assessment?
Yeah, I wasn't in it, but obviously I was, close to it.
I know you're an Ole Miss guy, but I definitely you're right there.
I mean, I cover Ole Miss, but I don't think anybody at Ole Miss would call me an Ole Miss guy.
Which is a compliment. That's a compliment.
It is. That means you're doing your job. They brought in a grad transfer quarterback that he had been familiar with from Penn State. Tommy Stevens. I don't think that was a particularly popular move in that locker room. The quarterback there, whose name's escaping me right now, who went into the transfer portal. I think people had felt like he had waited his turn behind Nick Fitzgerald, who had waited his turn behind Dak Prescott, and there was this sense that it's his opportunity now. I think Thompson is his name, and very popular kid in the locker room. They take that opportunity away, whether it was earned or whatever. In the eyes of the people in the locker room, that opportunity was taken away. And then the second thing that happened was that Mississippi State had an academic fraud scandal at the end of the previous season that resulted in a number of players getting 8-game suspensions. So it left Moorhead to choose which 8 games those players, many of whom were key players, would miss.
Ridiculous.
And so he would have them, he basically did this strategic thing where when they played LSU or Alabama or whatnot, those guys didn't play in those games, which was, whether he meant to or not, sending a signal to the rest of the team, I don't think we can win this game. So I'm saving these guys for the games that I think we can win. And it backfired.
Tell us about Coach O and what happened at Ole Miss. Of course, LSU coach and the man of the hour right now. But what happened at Ole Miss?
Of course. So my first day on the beat was Houston Nutt's first spring practice. So I missed all the Orgeron stuff. But I remember talking to a lot of those kids that had been recruited here by Ed Orgeron. And Ed Orgeron had just been fired. I guess he was with the New Orleans Saints maybe at the time. I think that's right. And they would tell you that he just ran the program in a way that every single day was the most physical day of the year. Every single day was the meat grinding OLDL drill. And the other thing that he did was when he was here, he didn't delegate anything. He tried to do everything. And as you know, that doesn't work. And he learned that the hard way. I think Ed Orgeron will tell you today, in fact, I've heard him say it, he doesn't get where he is today without the failure at Ole Miss. The failure at Ole Miss, while I'm sure humiliating and embarrassing, and I'm sure when he plays Ole Miss now, there's still a little extra, let's make sure we get this one. I think he also knows that it wasn't really Ole Miss's fault. He wasn't ready for that job. He learned it the hard way. This is not the league. This is absolutely not the league to have training wheels. Right. You got to know what you're doing.
Right.
And he failed. And to his everlasting credit, he took that failure combined with the experience that he had at SC as the interim coach. And when he got to LSU, I think he told himself, I'm going to delegate. I'm not going to treat every player on the roster like a defensive tackle. I'm going to let people do their thing. And it's funny. So I'm a Louisiana boy, and Ole Miss's first game of the season was an 11 a.m. game at Memphis. So I was finished with my work, and I popped open a cold one, and I turned on the TV, and I'm flipping, and I was actually going to watch Auburn and Oregon, and instead I got stuck on LSU Georgia Southern. And I was watching this LSU offense, and it was a thing of beauty. And I said, if Orgeron will let them just do that all season, that's a national championship team. And everybody's like, he's going to interfere. The first time that they get in trouble, he's going to come in and meddle and mess it up, because that's what he'd always done. And this year, to his credit, they're playing Texas, I think in week 2 or week 3, and the thing's a little tense, and it's getting a little close, and here come the Longhorns. And Ed Orgeron, to his credit, he said, let's keep going, pedal to the metal, let's push, let's throw. And they won that game, and since then, they've been an unstoppable force. They play with a tremendous confidence, and it's a team that has in many ways adopted the very good parts of his personality. And it's a charismatic team that's very confident and plays hard, and they're gregarious, and they love playing, and they're a lot of fun to watch. And I think it is a complete credit to Ed Orgeron, to the resilience of Joe Burrow, to that coaching staff there. They're a lot of fun.
Outstanding stuff. Don't be a stranger, man. Got to have you back. I really appreciate it, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anytime.
That's Neil McCready of rebelgrove.com. He does the Ole Miss beat for Rivals. Phenomenal information, as you just heard. And coming up, we're going to talk to Mike Coppinger, who was in Saudi Arabia for the Ruiz-Joshua fight. That's coming up here I think right now we're going to visit with Mike Coppinger here in LA, and he's just back, and very, very difficult travel schedule. And there's a burning question that I have about Mike Coppinger going to Saudi Arabia to cover the Ruiz Joshua fight. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. Now, I want to know what happened. How did you take care of your dog when you were out in Saudi Arabia, Baxter? What happened with Baxter while you were gone?
Baxter's chill. Baxter's always good. It's funny. I didn't see any dogs in Saudi Arabia. I guess they're not pets there. The pig is a holy sacred animal there, so no pork.
Really?
Pork is strictly forbidden in Saudi Arabia, as is alcohol. Although I did see a couple of people drunk there, the Americans. Not very many. I'm talking like one or two people connected to the fight.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get the alcohol if you're rich enough, I guess.
Yeah. So what was that experience? You just told me partly what the experience was like, but were you somewhat segregated, or are the people that traveled in for the fight kind of in their own area in the hotel and you're in this bubble, or did you go out and mingle with everybody out in normal life at Saudi Arabia in Riyadh?
I unfortunately didn't have enough time with the crazy week to really venture out as much as I would have liked in Riyadh, but I was staying at the Courtyard Marriott. Got to get those Marriott points. Going to push me to Platinum Elite.
Wow.
2020, so excited for that. And
awesome.
This trip's getting me over the hump to United Gold status, so all good there. Most of the people, like the fighters, Eddie Hearn, what have you, were staying at the Al Faisal Hotel, which is an extravagant hotel. There's two towers, a north and a south, and I believe it was the south tower where the fighters were staying, where they had these like multi-thousand square foot suites, and then across the other towers where the undercard fighters were staying. But one of the best things about Saudi Arabia, I think, is they have these amazing food spreads, buffet spreads with just sushi and jambalaya rice and all kinds of vegetables, chicken, lamb. Not that I don't eat lamb, but all those kinds of things. So, I heard a lot of bad things about Saudi Arabia going in, and I know they have, a certain human rights record that is definitely deserves to be criticized, but I was treated with nothing but respect. Everyone was super hospitable. People are incredibly friendly, certainly friendlier than most of us Americans. So overall, good trip.
So, you get the requisite criticism, and it's not necessarily unjustified of the decision to stage the fight there. And of course, you've been out front on all of this coverage, but what at the end of the day, and we're going to talk about the fight here in a second, because it's a fascinating fight, especially in the aftermath of the fight, but I want to know what you thought of it. But first off, at the end of the day, would you qualify this as a win for boxing, the fact that they had the fight there at the time that they did it?
Definitely a win for boxing. I mean, other than the fight wasn't very exciting. The first fight was incredibly exciting when not many people were watching.
Right.
This was the biggest fight of 2019. And I'm closer to it, of course. I'm in this bubble, but I don't know what you think, but I thought that it had amazing attention across social media. Seems like everybody was into the fight. It was trending on social. And I thought that being in Saudi Arabia kind of brought the fight to a new level, being in this different locale, even, again, with the controversy. But yeah, I would say overall a win for boxing, and it really, the heavyweight division is red hot right now. So we're going to keep the momentum going with Wilder Fury 2 in February. So
tell us, we're visiting with Mike Coppinger, of course, of the Athletic Box on Twitter, and it's Mike Coppinger, one word on Twitter, and so. Let's talk about the fight and assess the fight. Give us an overview of this fight, Joshua Ruiz, because I'm sure most of the people watching know that Ruiz scored that unbelievable knockout of Joshua. What happens in this fight?
Yeah, the first fight, the Ruiz win, was a 15-1 upset, major upset, one of the biggest in boxing history. And we had a lot of doubts going into the rematch. We didn't know how Joshua's chin would respond, how if he could box with the back foot. Turns out he could. Andy Ruiz came in at 283 pounds. And
wait. Repeat, what was that? 283.
283. And it was the second heaviest heavyweight champion of all time. The guy who was heavier than him was 7 foot something. So he had,
wow.
Ruiz, I had heard rumors that he was partying a lot, and, I didn't quite know how bad it was. But after the fight, Ruiz says in the ring, and he says again at the press conference over and over, I partied way too much. I overate. I wasn't disciplined. And, it's a shame. Yeah, he had the biggest opportunity of his life, and he let it go. He got thoroughly outboxed and dominated by Joshua. Wasn't an exciting fight because every time Andy Ruiz would close distance, Joshua would just back out of the exchange and keep popping the jab more and more. And while it wasn't entertaining, it was a very smart approach from Joshua because Ruiz has a lot quicker hands. He's a bigger puncher, and he has a granite chin. And it was a crazy experience, though.
But so when you talk about the weight and, what was that factor? Why did that give a big edge to Joshua in the fight? Why was that the situation that caused him to lose the fight?
Joshua was a former bodybuilder, and he was actually in the 240s for the first fight. He's always been a little stiff because of that. He actually lost 10 pounds and was a lot leaner and more mobile. They had an unusually large ring, 22-foot ring. And Ruiz's weight hampered him in terms of closing the distance, cutting off the ring. His feet were a little slower, his hands a little slower as well, and he just didn't go for broke. Probably wasn't in good condition to go for broke and really push the pace. But besides the weight, Ruiz just wasn't impressive, and I do think he's a good fighter. I don't think the first fight was a fluke, but you gotta boxing, Brooks, more than any other sport, boxing requires you to be in absolute tip-top shape.
Yeah, so it's really an extraordinary situation to see a boxer, especially at this level, to get up at the podium and to say it in the ring and then to tell TMZ in the airport, he won't stop saying it, and that's to his credit. It really is amazing. So, and Ruiz is kind of pitching everybody on this trilogy or a third fight. So what's the status of that situation?
I can't imagine there would be a third fight. There's not a thirst for it, right? I mean, maybe if Ruiz gets a couple of good wins, I would love to see him mix it up with a number of guys, because outside of the top three of Joshua, Wilder, and Fury, you can mix and match Ruiz with Dillian White, who won on the undercard, even though he looks lethargic, was also overweight. And then you have guys like Adam Kovanatsky and Luis Ortiz, who was knocked out by Wilder. So plenty of good fights for Ruiz. Get him a couple of wins. But I don't need to see the rematch right now. I want to see Joshua is probably going to head toward a fight with Kubrat Pulev in the spring in London. And Eddie Hearn told us that he's probably going to fight at the new stadium of the Tottenham Hotspurs.
Right.
It's a stadium in London that hosts. It holds around 62,000 for soccer. So you could probably get it, closer to 70 with seats on the pitch. But Joshua's back on top now. And I think we're going to see more fights in Saudi Arabia.
Really? Wow. This is fascinating stuff. Mike Coppinger from The Athletic is with us. And, I'm outside that bubble as a guy who follows boxing, very interested in boxing, obviously. But I think that there's a disconnect in boxing right now in the heavyweight division. There's a ton of potential. And I personally thought it was a mistake to do it in Saudi. Now, I understand why it was done. There was an unbelievable amount of money involved, or else it wouldn't have been done. But I think for the sport, because of the time and the difference, and I didn't see necessarily the kind of buzz, I don't think they took advantage of it to the extent they could have had they held it at Madison Square Garden, or had they held it at maybe Wembley or in Manchester, whatever it was. Let me ask you, if they had held that fight, it's a hypothetical dummy question, I guess you could say, but had they had that fight in New York or Manchester or London or where, Los Angeles, do you think that we could have been looking at a third fight? Or do you think that Ruiz we wouldn't have had a third fight no matter what, had Ruiz performed that way, no matter where it was geographically?
I don't think the location matters with Ruiz. Ruiz just didn't train hard enough. And, he said he was treated very well in Saudi Arabia. That wasn't a problem. He just didn't feel like training and let the newfound game get to him. But of course, the Zone, which was the U.S. broadcaster, would have preferred the fight in the U.S. or second choice in the U.K. because of, like you said, the timing. Although I always wonder, why does the timing matter? Because for years we had Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier fighting on ABC and Wild World of Sports in the afternoon. We have college football and NFL in the afternoon. Why can't we have big fights during the daytime? But you're right. It's a common complaint, Brooks.
Yeah, it's not like it was on at 4:00 in the morning, but I'm just trying to figure out what it is about Ruiz that there's no interest in a third fight. And I think that it kind of speaks to the disconnect with Joshua. And I'm not saying Eddie Hearn's a bad guy, but I think that he's kind of doing a disservice to the heavyweight division. And that goes for PBC and Top Rank too, that we have this separation between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, who we, for crying out loud, haven't even had. This is because of me, I know, but we haven't even brought them up really in the conversation. You have a little bit. They should be part of this conversation, Michael, right now, as it pertains to Joshua. We should be talking about, in my opinion, okay, when is he going to fight the winner of Wilder Fury? When are we going to unify the heavyweight division? I mean, where are we on that? I'm passionate about it, by the way.
Well, Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury are going to fight February 22nd in a pay-per-view that's a joint collaboration between Fox and ESPN, and that's a bilateral rematch clause in that contract. So we could be looking at a third fight between Wilder and Fury in August. So at that point, I don't know if I doubt a fight with Joshua and the winner is going to be viable for 2020. I think it's more of a 2021 prospect. But you're right. Joshua versus the winner is by far the biggest fight in boxing. Probably even versus the loser is a huge fight too. And we really need to make it happen. But politics are hard in boxing, especially it's really the television politics more than anything at this point.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about in relation to the Ruiz Joshua fight was DAZN, because DAZN, we mentioned Eddie Hearn, we mentioned, of course, PBC, Al Heyman, and we've got ESPN and Top Rank, and Al Heyman's kind of Showtime and Fox. Top Rank is ESPN and Bob Arum, and then you've got Eddie Hearn and DAZN. And it sounds like, and I read some of your stuff at The Athletic, which is great coverage, by the way. Subscribe. It's unbelievable. But, I mean, it looks like DAZN did pretty well. That's the indication. So if they did really well, I keep going back to this. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Ruiz, but if DAZN did really well, why would Eddie Hearn and DAZN not necessarily want to promote another Ruiz fight? Is there a challenger who's that much more attractive than Ruiz that isn't Wilder or Fury that Eddie Hearn is interested in? I mean, wouldn't you think that if DAZN did so well with this Saudi fight, they wouldn't put on a third fight necessarily in Manchester or in London?
It's a twofold problem. One, there's not a lot of interest from anyone in a third fight with Ruiz and Joshua. I don't want to see a third fight. The fight was boring. Joshua can fight that same way again. And Ruiz.
But what if Ruiz loses weight? What if he loses weight and he's back in shape?
He should have. I think he needs to get a couple of wins first before we take him seriously now. So for me, and for everyone I spoke to, I don't want to see a third fight right now. Also, Joshua has 3 titles, and he has a lot of mandatory fights to do. And for people who don't watch boxing, that means the sanctioning organizations will say, okay, you have to fight our number 1 contender now, but they don't make you do that every time out. It's just once in a while. They let you do so-called optional defenses, which is what Ruiz was in the first place. So Joshua has a mandatory to do with the IBF, and he has a mandatory to do with the WBO. And that's going to be Alexander Usyk for the BO and Kubrat Pulla for the IBF. But Usyk is a really intriguing challenger, former cruiserweight champion, and I'm sure, he's number 5 on most pound-for-pound list, if not higher. Incredible talent, Olympic medalist. So we could see Joshua. I think we'll see Joshua versus both of those guys in 2020, Pulla and Usyk.
On the latter, do you think that Joshua is really going to be pushed? Could he lose that fight? Is that a possibility?
Usyk is a little bit of a mystery right now as a heavyweight. It always is when you have these smaller guys moving up. We saw him against Chaz Witherspoon, a guy who hadn't won really a meaningful fight ever, but hadn't boxed on any kind of level in 5 years. So that didn't show us anything. And now Usyk's probably going to fight Derek Chisora February or March. Chisora, a big puncher, durable guy, not an elite heavyweight by any means. But I think there'll be a lot of intrigue. I think there will be people that will give Usyk a chance. He's a great boxer. He's a better boxer than Joshua, probably.
Right.
But the power.
That seems like it could be a very dangerous fight. And I think what we saw Joshua did what he had to do against Ruiz, but based on what we saw with Ruiz in the first fight, I think there's still some gigantic questions about Joshua. If Joshua is that sort of historic generational heavyweight, I'm not seeing it necessarily. And I think Usyk's going to be a fight that we'll see what happens. I think Usyk's next fight is going to tell the tale on how he's going to be able to compete in that division, perhaps going into the Joshua fight. But let's talk about the Fury and the Wilder fight. And where are you on that fight? I mean, who do you think is going to win that fight? And it's, it's right around the corner. So that's what's coming up next. That's the next big fight in boxing, right?
Definitely. I expect that fight to be started to be pushed heavily, going with the college football ramping up and with the NFL playoffs ramping up as well on both ESPN and Fox. We should see a major push, of course, pay-per-view. So networks have a lot of interest in making sure this fight succeeds. And I'm going to go with Deontay Wilder. Wilder, I scored the first fight with Fury when they met in December 2018. Wilder had 2 really hard knockdowns of Fury, including one in the 12th round. Of course, that's, went viral. I just think Wilder's going to connect harder and earlier this time and end the fight. But it's a 50-50 coin flip, which is rare, of course, in boxing.
What do you what do you think the future of Wilder is going to be? What do you think is going to be the future of Fury? Because we talked about this last time, I mean, he has a lot of outside interests, but he also has his deal with Top Rank. And so what's his deal with Top Rank in relation to him continuing to box, let's say, after this fight against Wilder? And could we see a third fight, you think?
Fury has a 6-fight deal, I believe, with Top Rank. He's making around $15 million a fight right now. He's going to make way more than $15 million for the Wilder rematch. A lot of that will depend on how the pay-per-view performs because he has upside. And that fight, as I mentioned earlier, has a bilateral rematch clause. So if both sides want to do it again, they'll, the winner
but it has
will
to
get
be
60%. Yeah, the winner will get 60%, the loser will get 40%, and they'll do that in the summer, probably in August, around the Summer Olympics. So you're right, though. Fury does have a lot of interests. He's wrestled in WWE now, actually in Saudi Arabia, and he's a great personality. But he's still young. He's only 30 years old. So I think we'll see him box for a while more. And who knows? He might win the fight. It's a 50-50 bout.
So out of that, and we just talked about this, and I know you mentioned this already, but we're not looking at a Josh. I mean, if Joshua, let's say, gets through an Usyk or gets through his next couple of fights, do you think we're actually going? Because I have no faith, Mike. I really don't, unfortunately. But I'd like to think that Joshua's going to get through, and Wilder or Fury is going to get through their situation, and we're finally going to have a matchup of these two guys, the top 2 guys in the heavyweight division. If it plays out that way, there's a lot of moving parts there. But ultimately, do you think that if we're in a position, all right, if let's say Wilder dominates Fury, all right, so Wilder's sitting there and he dominates Fury in this next fight, and we've got Joshua, he wins his next fight or 2. Are we going to see Joshua against Wilder?
I sure hope so, Brooks. You never know in boxing. We waited probably 5 years too late for Mayweather Pacquiao. That fight was ripe to be made in 2009. We ended up getting it in 2015. So I don't want to see the same thing happen here. Both Wilder and Fury are 30. Sorry, Wilder's 34. Fury, I think, is 30 or 31. Joshua's 30. So we don't want to wait too long, right? Even though heavyweights have proven time and again that they can go longer in age.
But will Al Heyman and Eddie Hearn get together and do that? Or if it's Fury, would Bob Arum throw in with it? I mean, that seems like it's more likely, right? Hearn and Bob Arum perhaps working together, maybe. But what about Al Heyman and Wilder? Would Al Heyman be as likely to work together with Eddie Hearn to cross that boundary in politics? I mean, what's your assessment of that, your educated opinion?
I think they could get it done. You have to put the egos aside. I know Eddie would definitely do it. I'm sure Al Heyman would do it. I think the problem is going to be that the Zone doesn't do pay-per-view. So then how do you make that work, right? You can't do a joint pay-per-view with the Zone. I guess you could, but it's not set up that way right now. Do you do a 2-fight deal where one fight's on the Zone, one fight's on Fox pay-per-view? I'm not so sure. That's got to be figured out. The guys have to win. But I think eventually there'll be so much money involved. I mean, could you imagine if Wilder comes through, like you said, and Joshua, how big that fight would be? That would be an extravagant sporting event, one of the biggest, period. Forget about boxing.
You would think. I mean, you've got, like we said, if Wilder, who knows? Fury's not the big puncher, but he's an amazing personality. If you don't know, Tyson Fury, Google him. He's unbelievable personality. They both are, Wilder and Fury. But if Wilder can score a knockout or score some big victories over Fury, and Joshua keeps doing what he's doing, and you've got this culture class, of course, you got the American and you've got the Brit, and Fury also fits into that category. It's tremendous amount of interest and intrigue. And you mentioned it earlier with Fox and with ESPN and that promotional apparatus, I'd like to see boxing get really, really close to mainstream. And I think they have a window of opportunity here to do it legitimately, where it's not a circus sideshow act, like kind of what we saw with Mayweather and Pacquiao, and it didn't last. So I want to ask you before we let you go, what's the status of Manny Pacquiao and his boxing career? And what about Mayweather? Are we looking at a Mayweather comeback in the future?
Strange as this may sound, I would actually like to see Mayweather Pacquiao too at this point. Pacquiao's looked so good. Had that win over Keith Thurman in July, huge win. And Mayweather hasn't fought since the McGregor fight, even if you count that a fight in 2017. So now it's interesting. Mayweather with that big layoff, Pacquiao looking and to be in great form. Pacquiao's going to come back in March or April. Not sure just quite against who yet. I think Danny Garcia is a big possibility. Mikey Garcia's on the table, although I expect Mikey Garcia to sign with Eddie Hearn in the zone pretty soon and possibly fight Jesse Vargas on February at welterweight. So a lot of moving parts here. I think Danny Garcia got to be the guy, though, for Manny Pacquiao, if that's the case.
And wait a minute. Now, I never thought I would hear you say, maybe you've said this in the past, but you're looking forward. Now, is that a commentary on the sport of boxing, that we don't have a lot of young, dynamic, big personality stars outside of the heavyweight division? We have Canelo, of course, but that you're looking forward to Mayweather coming? I mean, is this legitimate that Mayweather is going to be someone that you're going to want to pay to watch coming back?
I'm not so sure that Mayweather would want to fight Pacquiao at this point with the way Pacquiao's looking, and now that Mayweather hasn't fought in a long time and is older. But that's why there's an intrigue. I mean, and you can't tell me it wouldn't be a huge fight still. The first fight broke every record, did 4.6 million pay-per-view buys. This fight wouldn't do that. But the rematch would still do what, 2 million, 2.5? It's been enough of the time now. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit due to lack of stars, but these are still two of the best fighters of all time. And they're always in great shape. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would watch it.
All right, give me a percentage on Mayweather coming back. What's the % chance that Mayweather is going to box again?
I think he's going to. I'll say he's 85%.
85%? That's freaking awesome. That's awesome.
The bigger question is whether he fights anybody that we actually care about.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would think that Pacquiao would be the guy, but I'm really asking you about, is boxing still with Floyd? Is he really feeling it, that he really wants to do it, or is it just a money thing?
Hard to say. We don't really know. Floyd Mayweather changes his mind all the time. He'll wake up tomorrow and feel differently. But he loves money, and if he can make, $200-300 million, he'll do it.
Man, I can't thank you enough. I know you just got back into town, a long travel schedule. Great job with the coverage, and look forward to having you back again soon. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you so much, Brooks.
That's Mike Coppinger of The Athletic, and at Mike Coppinger on Twitter, one word, MikeCoppinger. And we mentioned this before. You wonder who is like the Adrian Wojnarowski of boxing, the guy, Ian Rappaport of the NFL, the guy who has the proprietary information that's ahead of everybody else in boxing. I mean, we're literally talking to the guy. So when he is a market mover, and I mean that literally, he's a market mover. Outside of the guys who are doing the fights, Bob Arum, Al Heyman, Eddie Hearn, John Skipper at DAZN, Nick Khan at CAA, those guys, those are the most powerful guys in boxing right now. The guys that just ticked off. Nick Khan at CAA has kind of come out in the open in public. He's the guy who was able and who did the deal. Nick Khan, the guy at CAA, who's now going to be in charge of the SEC college football conference, has contracted him to handle their broadcast right situation, which may reopen, and CBS and ESPN and Fox may go toe-to-toe for those rights. We'll see what happens there. But he's the guy who did a big deal with Top Rank for ESPN. And he's the guy who was able to broker a deal and bring together PBC and Fox and Showtime, that group of fighters who are represented by Al Heyman, together with Bob Arum and ESPN, and Deontay Wilder is with PBC. Tyson Fury is with Top Rank, ESPN, and Nick Khan was able to bring them together into the same room in what was really an extraordinary achievement and accomplishment for Nick and Al and Bob, and coming together and making that fight, the Wilder Fury fight, which is huge for boxing. It's just really frustrating for me because it looks like we're on the precipice of boxing really taking off back into the mainstream, where not only if we're able to get an Anthony Joshua, who's this amazing performer in the ring, incredibly dynamic personality, who would sell well here in the United States, but you still probably don't even know who he is if you're watching this. You should, right? Tyson Fury's in the same category. Deontay Wilder, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, big Alabama Crimson Tide fan. All these guys should be mainstream, and they're right on the precipice. But when you take the rematch, and I disagree with Mike to a certain extent about the rematch of Ruiz and Joshua, you probably saw highlights of this fat guy, the everyman, Ruiz, knocking out, Anthony Joshua to win the heavyweight title. It was a big deal. So what happened? Because Eddie Hearn, the manager promoter of Anthony Joshua, the guy who's affiliated with DAZN, and John Skipper, which is another one of those political entities that controls a lot of fighters, they control Canelo Alvarez and Triple G. Because Eddie Hearn gets offered $60 million, that's what happened, bottom line is. And Mike reported it. Mike Copperdew was just on with this. Because Eddie Hearn, the manager of Joshua, gets offered $60 million, they take the fight to Saudi Arabia, right? And nobody saw it. And, of course, Ruiz was overweight. Maybe that was a good thing, right? But had they put that fight in Los Angeles or New York back at Madison Square Garden, number one, maybe Ruiz doesn't show up weighing 280 pounds. Who knows if the fight being in Saudi and not having a lot of promotion stateside had something to do with Ruiz not training for the fight. That's possible. That's possible. But I think an opportunity was lost with that rematch because it was a money grab for Joshua's promoter, manager, Eddie Hearn. And so now, basically, that's just out the window. So you've lost that. It's up in smoke, except for the bank account of, Eddie Hearn. That's it. That was a big opportunity that was lost for boxing. Now we've got Wilder and Fury coming up in February. We'll see what comes out of that. But we should be having a conversation. I mean, the heavyweight division is clearly broken in two. You've got the Joshua side and the DAZN Eddie Hearn side, and then you've got the Wilder Fury side and the PBC Al Heyman side, along with Top Rank, Bob Arum, and Tyson Fury. It's broken in two, and that's not the way it should be. And so whoever wins Wilder and Fury should be fighting Joshua, period. We unify the heavyweight division. That fight happens in LA, or it happens in New York, or Jerry Jones stages it on Fox Broadcast Network at Dallas Cowboy Stadium, AT&T. That's what should be happening in boxing. And that's why it's a shame to me that a lot of these names, a lot of these things that I'm describing to you are really bewildering, and you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, because I'm a boxing guy. I'm really into it. And I think it's fascinating. And I mean, I get tired of people talking about, when it comes to boxing, well, this guy's got a great story, an amazing back. Yeah, sure he does. A lot of people do. But in this particular case, what we're talking about with these boxers, they really do have unbelievable backgrounds. I mean, Tyson Fury's life story is unbelievable. And most of you don't know it. And this just drives me nuts. I'm like everybody else. So that's why I love having Mike on, because I know I'm talking to the Oracle. I know I'm talking to the guy who, Cam, I'm just looking at your note here. So Cam Smith, our producer on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. So as I wrap up this rant, and we're spending a lot of time on boxing, I appreciate you indulging me. All right. But we were talking about college football earlier with Neil McCready. By the way, how great was he? Who is, of course, the guy who covers the Ole Miss beat, had the breaking news about Lane Kiffin. And we've also talked about Sam Pittman, and we're going to try to get somebody on from Arkansas to break things down the way Neil did today for Ole Miss, because you could see that's great information. It's not just about Ole Miss. It's about a lot of different things. and understanding how college football works. But we want to double back to Sam Pittman, who is a guy. Maybe we're going to make him our mascot, Cam. We're going to have to go to the well a few more times in Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas, where the Razorbacks are located. They've got a new coach, Sam Pittman, offensive line. Think of he's kind of like a Rex Ryan, a Southern version of Rex Ryan. Think of that when you think of Sam Pittman. So we played a video earlier of him crying at his press conference yesterday. We also had a bizarre video. It's almost indescribable how he goes about recruiting college football players from high school through some of the video tweets that he would send out. And so now I come to understand that we have video. Our producer, Cam Smith, has dug some video up. This is going to be amazing. From the first team meeting between Pittman and the Arkansas football team, his new team. He's the new head coach. So go ahead and play that video for us. I haven't seen this video. Here we go.
Hey, so great for that. Thank you. I'm not a cliche coach. I'm just a freaking country dude from Grove, Oklahoma. I'm going to be loyal to you. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to communicate to you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to let you know that you're damn important. This phone right here, it's at 480 some text messages. You know about 100 of them? That coach is going to come coach at Arkansas. Yes, sir. Huh? I ain't going to tell you what schools. I ain't going to sit here and tell you what schools. When we hire coaches, they're going to have the same philosophy that I do, is they have to have a love for Arkansas, and they have to have loyalty to Arkansas. They have to have communication skills for our players, guys that they can sit back and they can talk to you and understand where you're coming from. The only way that we can have success is for you guys to go to work. And I promise you we'll go to work. I want to be around people that go, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. And the only way you can do that, guy, is go to work. You guys understand the tradition of the Arkansas Razorbacks, correct? Well, how come we can't get back to that? Can't we? We at Arkansas, the University of damn Arkansas, and we're going to get it done, and we're going to get it done together. I need everybody in this room. Everybody in this room. You're a scholarship guy, you're a walk-on guy, it don't matter. We need everybody in this room, because all ladies are saying, I don't want to lose one guy in this room. Again, you didn't choose me, I chose you. I'm damn glad I did.
Wow. That's pretty good, man. That's not bad. That's not bad. Thanks for that. Cam Smith, our producer, digging that up. Sam Pittman. He is going to be we're going to have to, the University of Damn Arkansas. I love that. UDM. University of Damn Arkansas. He's going to be a media favorite, you would think. I just hope that they don't have a disastrous start. I think you said they played Notre Dame. They got this ridiculous non-con schedule. Let me scroll up on the text message box. You put it in there for me. The flex bone. Let me go up here a little bit more and see. Oh, yeah, they play Nevada, which is ask Purdue about Nevada. Purdue lost to Nevada this season, and Notre Dame. So, you know, when you look at their schedule and the division that they're in the SEC, it's going to be a tough year. But, you know, it's going to be fun, it looks like. And so great show today. We're going to continue to cover the Patriot situation, and we're going to go a little more in depth tomorrow about what's being reported. We got a breakdown from New England from a guy who covers the beat, Ian Steele from ABC6. We'll continue to touch base with people up in Boston, up in New England, as we always do. We have a lot of people up in New England we've already had on the show many times who are plugged into the situation. So we will be calling on them along with all the other big stories around the country. We do this every single day on Fancred, Monday through Friday, weekdays, beginning at noon Eastern time. And so today I want to thank Matt Lombardo from NJ.com. Just phenomenal lineup, I guess, today. Matt did a great job with the Giants, with Penn State. I mean, I feel like I'm totally up to speed with the New York Giants after talking to Matt. It's really, that's what I love about football. Every one of these teams has this incredible story, dynamic. And then we talked to Neil McCready about Ole Miss, that situation, the Arkansas situation with him, Mississippi State. And we talked to Ian Steele, as I just mentioned, about the Patriots, what's going on the ground right now with that intrigue, with the videography crap that's going on now. And that's, I think, a huge story. I haven't really got a chance to weigh in on that. We didn't have time today, but I will tomorrow. Believe me, I will. And then, and we also had just moments ago, Mike Coppinger. This is probably the only I consider our show to be a mainstream national show. And this is probably going to be the only show out there. Not probably, it is the only show out there where we're really going to cover boxing, continue to cover it, the good stuff, right? The stuff that really matters, the stuff that you're going to wake up one morning. Oh, look at this guy over here, Tyson Fury. Well, you're going to know about Tyson Fury the next time you see him, because we're going to be continuing to follow these stories and keep you ahead of the game. And so we'll be back tomorrow with more great guests. We'll continue to cover what's happening with the Patriots, everything, you name it. I want to thank our producer, Cam Smith. Phenomenal job with all these guests every single day. And I'm live in Los Angeles. My name is Brooks Melchior, and I say so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.